The Séamus Ennis Arts Centre first opened its doors in 2001. In memory of the great piper Séamus Ennis, the centre aims to commemorate his work in the performance, archiving and promotion of Irish music. Through concerts, workshops, education, festivals, media and other events, the centre provides a platform where works by those whose mastery and love of Irish arts can be explored and their contribution to their art forms safeguarded and made accessible to future generations. Len Graham has been a full-time singer and historian since 1982. Throughout his early years, a passion for the songs of his native Ulster grew steadily, and from the early 1960s, Len sought out and recorded older singers, in particular Eddie Butcher and Joe Holmes. Len's musical friendship with Joe resulted in 2 lovely albums being recorded in the 1970s. And his long association with John Campbell brought storytelling and song to a world audience. As well as releasing a number of solo albums, Len Graham has also toured extensively with the group Skylark, who released 4 successful albums during their 10 years together. The Séamus Ennis Arts Centre is delighted to have Len Graham partake in this lecture series.
I left my father and I left my mother and I left my brothers and my sisters too. And I left my friends and my kind relations. I left them all for to go with you. As she never once said she was going to leave me, until one evening when she came in. In all my life sure I never did see as fine a wee lassie upon my soul. And she's got sweethearts 20, 18 and 16 and 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 and none, 19, 17 and 15 and 13, 11, 9, 7, 5, 3 and 1. And it all goes around by the wheel of fortune. As it goes around it puzzles me. Fair maids they are so deceiving, sad experience it teaches me. Madam, I have got gold and silver. Madam, I have got a house and a land. Madam, I have got worldly treasures, all will be at your command. What care I for your gold and your silver? What care I for your house and your land? What care I for your worldly treasures? All that I want is a nice young man. For she's got sweethearts 20, 18 and 16 and 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 and none, 19, 17 and 15 and 13, 11, 9, 7, 5, 3 and 1. And it all goes around by the wheel of fortune. As it goes around it puzzles me. Fair maids they are so deceiving, sad experience it teaches me. Why do you crave so much for beauty? It is a flower that will soon decay. It's like the rose that blooms in summer, when winter comes sure it fades away. And if I had known the first time I met you that a young girl's heart was so ill to win, I ne'er would have wasted my time and patience. One love ends and another begins. Come all young maids, I pray take a warning. Never heed what a young man says. They're like the stars in a misty evening. You think they're near, but they're far away. For they have got sweethearts 20, 18 and 16 and 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 and none, 19, 17 and 15 and 13, 11, 9, 7, 5, 3 and 1. And it all goes around by the wheel of fortune. As it goes around it puzzles me. Fair maids they are so deceiving, sad experience it teaches me. Something like that. Well, I started singing very, very long time ago, far back as I can remember. My mother said I came out singing. She sang to me in the womb, she said, and I came out singing, but I can't remember that far back, but I certainly have been singing a long, long time. Now, my father was working in Glasgow, and he wanted my mother to move over. He was working over during the war over in Glasgow, but she wouldn't leave Glenarm, where I'm originally from, up in the Glens of Antrim. I'm now got kidnapped about 40 years ago and living down in South Armagh this last almost 40 years. But that's where it all started. Two women, my grandmother and mother, were singers, and my father as well, but he was more of a Friday or Saturday night when he had a few jars in him, but they were singing regardless. They didn't need drink to sing. They were what I became, a sort of a compulsive singers. So it all started off with all sorts of songs, with no television, of course, but we had a wireless and we had a wind-up gramophone. So there's all sorts of things coming out of the wireless. And the definition of folk songs I didn't hear until I was well into my teens. They were just called owl songs. And a lot of them mentioned local places. The village was Glenarm. There was a song about Glenarm, so that pricked my ears up. Oh, it being on a fine September morn, the weather in being warm, it fell my lot to stroll along the bay of sweet Glenarm. The yellow corn was waving bright, and the fields in bright array, and the blue seas washed the pebbles white along Glenarm Bay. Oh, says I, my dear, if you're sincere, here is my heart and hand. In wedlock bands we'll join our hands, and married we will be. And when old age is creeping on, and our locks are turning grey, I will always mind that harvest morn we met along the bay. Oh, the blue seas washed the pebbles white along Glenarm Bay. And there's about another 40 verses, but that would take up the whole hour. So I'll have to abbreviate some of these songs just so that you can get a flavour of the sort of stuff that I would have been listening to. And of course, I had an uncle, my mother's older brother, and he wrote a parody on that. There's a rock out between the two villages of Glenarm and Carnlough. They're about 2 miles apart. It's out in the bay. They call it Black Rock or Carrickdhu, and he made a bit of a parody on it. Of course, when you're a youngster, you're always looking for mischief, and I'll give you a wee bit of it. What way did it go now? The Black Rock was white with seagulls along Glenarm Bay. But there's more than that to it, but I better not. And another song that my grandmother sang that took my fancy was another local song, Murlough, and it's a very beautiful little bay, a gorgeous little bay. It's one of the nicest places in Ireland. Well, I'm prejudiced anyway. And it's between two heads. You've got Fairhead and Torhead in this beautiful little cove. It's where Roger Casement wanted to be buried, but he didn't end up there. He ended up in Glasnevin. That's where he wanted to be buried. It's a very beautiful place, and it's the closest point to Scotland. Mullaghantire, 13 miles away, clear day, which we do get once or twice a year. You can see fields, you can see houses so close, and it has to be a clear day. And we get a few of those occasionally. I was up there not so long ago doing a bit of filming with BBC, and it was a clear day, and I was glad because they were able to capture how close Scotland is to Ireland at that point. If you get a chance to go up that coast road from Larne the whole way up to Portrush, about 80 miles, it's been preserved for nearly about 100 years now by the National Trust, and includes the Gents Causeway and Carrick-a-Reed Bridge, but also that lovely little place called Murlough. Anyway, the song that my grandmother sang was Murlough Shore. You might be more familiar with another version of it that Dolores Kane recorded. She got it from her two aunts, Sarah and Rita. And Sarah and Rita told me that they learned it off a 78 RPM record by a man from Donegal called John McGettigan, who recorded it in New York back in the 1930s. Different words, not completely different, but it's certainly the same song with a variant. And that's what happens in the oral tradition. You get lots and lots of variants with the music and with the songs as well. So this is a couple of verses of my grandmother's version of the song anyway. You hills and dales and flowery vales that lie near the Murlough shore, you winds that grows over Martin's hill will I ever see you more? Where the primrose grow and the violet too, and the trout and salmon play, till with line and took, delight I took, for to spend my youthful day. Last night I went for to see my love, for to hear what she would say, that she might think some pity on me, for I was going away. She says, I love a sailor lang, he's the one I do adore. So take this for your answer now, and trouble me no more. Farewell unto Lord Antrim's groves, where stands a bleaching green, where the linen webs lie clean and white, and the crystal streams run still, where many the happy hour I spent, but now, alas, they're o'er, since the girl I love has left me far, far from the Moorlock shore. And there were songs about all sorts of things, poaching, shipwrecks. There was a tragedy at a regatta back in the 19th century that my grandmother sang about. There was, I think it was 5 young lads were out. There was fishing villages, Glenarm, Carnlough, Cushendall, Cushendun, and they had a regatta. Clinker boats way back at that time. And their boat capsized. 5 young lads were all from the one village of Carnlough, and they were killed in that tragedy. There was a song about that. It was a song about a shipwreck. And my grandmother, I still have the plaid that had been from local wool, dyed from local plants and things, and all the different colours. She pointed out what had produced that dye. You know, the kilt and various things produced the various stripes. But there was one stripe was indigo. That'd be dark navy. One of those really dark colours anyway. And she said, that's the only colour that didn't come locally. It's not from herbs or anything. That came from a shipwreck. A boat went down in 1834 called the Enterprise, and it was coming from Peru with a cargo of indigo. So the one stripe in the plaid was from that source. I hold it. I've taken it out of the bin a few times because every time I turn it back, somebody discards it. But no, it's not going. It's mine. It has memories. Anyway, I have to mention 2 organizations here because they feature. Back in 1951, there was 2 men from Antrim, friends of my father, an uilleann piper called Willie Hope, who was, according to my father, Willie told him he was a direct descendant of Jemmy Hope of 1798 fame. You must remember, back in 1951, uilleann pipes were what you might call a rare breed. They were an endangered species, and you probably could have counted the number of uilleann pipers in Ireland in 2 hands, or maybe a wee bit more than that, but there weren't that many of them. And it was mostly the pipers that organised this outing to Mullingar in 1951, including Leo Rolsom. They went down to Mullingar, and the following year they held the first flat ceol in Monaghan Town in 1952 and adopted the name Cultus Culteri Erin. But that's how it formed. And then Willie and Davy decided they'd have to form something up on the north. There weren't that many pipers around at that time. There had been a very fine piper and pipe maker called O'Mealy, Richard O'Mealy, but he had passed away in the late 40s, so there was a scarcity of pipe makers and there was a scarcity of pipers. But there was plenty of fiddlers. Fiddlers, particularly in Antrim and the northern counties particularly, the predominant instrument was the fiddle for traditional music. And they decided to form the Antrim and Derry Fiddlers Association in 1953. And they would intersperse singers in between the jigs, reels and hornpipes. By the time I was in my teens, early 60s, I was being called up to sing a song or two during the course of these gatherings. They would be held in all around the glens of Antrim at that time, different halls and gatherings. And One of the fiddlers came up to me, this had been about 1963, and asked me for that song I'm after singing. That was my first encounter with Joe Holmes. I got his address, and a few nights later I landed around at Killyrammer, where he lived outside Ballymoney, with the song, and he started to sing for me. And that was the start of a wonderful friendship that lasted right up to he passed away in 1978. So it about 15 years of going around the country, fla's and gatherings and ceilidh houses and all sorts of wonderful gatherings. Joe had a huge repertoire of songs that he got mostly from his mother. I missed his mother. She had just died in the 1950s. But by all accounts, not just from Joe, but from neighbours and other people said she was a mighty singer. And it was a ceilidh house, so people used to call in and share music and songs and crack with them over the years. So that's the sort of places that were very common throughout Ireland before we had rural electrification and mechanisation of farming and all sorts of things that brought about so much change, including my own family with generations of blacksmiths. The blacksmith's forge closed down in the late 50s. The horses had gone out of vogue. The little Fergie tractor were now taken over where the horses used to be involved. So I'll sing a song actually that has a connection with Séamus Ennis. I met Seamus a couple of times. First time was at the All-Ireland Fleadh in Clonus in 1964. I know that Bettystown, the Gathering of Pipers, was held in 68, so it was shortly after that there was a jingle held in Gormanstown, and Seamus was asked along to give a recital, and he did what he did so well, played the pipes, played the whistle, told stories, sang songs, and gave us backgrounds to some of the singers that he met when he was out doing his collecting. So during the course of that, he played a tune he called The Trip Over the Mountain. And he recited a line of it that his grandfather sang the whole song, but he hadn't, unfortunately, been able to take down the whole song, so he only had a line of it. And I was delighted that I was able to sing him a version of it that Joe Holmes had given me. It happened to be on a moonshining night when I first took a notion to marry. I lifted my hat and my staff in my hand, and I seemed for to be in a hurry. I jogged along to her cabin I came, and my heart did rejoice when I viewed this fair dame. I lifted the latch and I bid her good in, saying I'm going over the mountain. Oh, what foolish notions got into your head? I'm glad for to see you so merry. It's 12 of the clock and the old folks in bed. Speak low or me mammy, she'll hear you. Well, if it is jesting is true, I have courted a year and I think that will do. And this very night I will marry with you, if you'll venture with me o'er the mountain. Oh no, my dearie, I'll stay as I am, for I think it is fitter and banter. I lifted my hat and my staff in my hand, saying I'll soon put an end to this matter. Stop, stop, my wee laddie, till I get me shoes. And my heart did rejoice when she heard the glad news. She ran to the door, saying, I hope you'll excuse my simplicity over the mountain. Now the moon and the stars illuminated the sky, and the morning star brightly shining, when me and my darling set out our long journey, till we came to the altar of Hymen. Between fiddling and dancing we spent the whole day, and the fear of marriage it soon fades away. And oftentimes too, my darling, I say, do you rue going over the mountain? And another 10 verses. Okay. And It did cross the Atlantic in broadsides, and it appeared in Popular Ballads of Wexford. It was the name of the book, by Thomas D'Arcy McGee. It's nothing to do with Wexford. Sorry, Thomas. It's a County Antrim song. Oh well, that happens. Now, there's a lot of talk. I heard an old hippie on the wireless there from America talking about being in Woodstock up in New York State in 1969. And he said, Woodstock, he says, mud, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, 1963, my good friend, the late Davy Dillon, and I hitchhiked down to Mullingar. And it was mud, porter, and jigs and reels. Much the same, though. And Davy passed away when he was only 59, the creator, I don't know. Not fair. But we'd been told about this by a neighbour of Davy's, a man called Frank McCollum, a great character, fiddler, composer. Many of his tunes are played and I don't know who composed them, but I know quite a few of them have gone into the tradition, which is a sign that they're good tunes. One of his tunes, probably the most famous one, is called The Home Ruler. And I said to Frank many, many moons ago, Frank, did you write that for the Reverend James Armour? Well, who's he? He says, oh, he was a home rule. He was a radical Presbyterian clergyman from Ballymoney. He was a great advocate for home rule. Oh, not at all, says Frank. I wrote that for Sally, my wife. She's the home ruler. Well, Frank was a great character altogether, and he told us about these wonderful gatherings of flag colds. He'd been to quite a few of them from way back before 63. So we hitchhiked, Davy and I hitchhiked. We got a big pair of ex-army army boots and a wee bivouac, an ex-army bivouac thing that we pitched in a graveyard, and we had a wonderful time at that fla in Mullingar, 63. So then we formed a branch along with Frank and others, Mickey McElhatton and the whole gathering of people from the glens of Antrim. We formed a branch in Ballycastle in 1965. They had me up there earlier in the year, reminiscing about the people that were there, and I think myself, I might be the last survivor of that gathering. And there was Mickey McElhatton was one of the great characters that was around at that time, a famous potching maker, Keen of the Glens, and great friend of my family's. But Mickey finally got caught, and he was up in Ballymena, and he got Jack McCann, the local solicitor in Ballymena, to stand for him anyway, to represent him in court. Mickey, like myself, was a wee bit of hard of hearing, even more so than me. His hearing wasn't great, so not only was Jack representing him, but he was also his ears in the courthouse. Jack McCann told me this story. And old Lynn was the RM, and Lynn was a sort of a teetotaler, sort of a Father Matthew of the 20th century, death on drink, and particularly on illicit drink. And he says, Mr. McElhatton, and you do the wee half-rim spectacles on him. Do you realise, he says, that making water in public is an offence? Making illicit whiskey is a felony. What's he saying? What's he saying there, Jack? He says making whiskey or making potching is illegal. Is it? Because, Jesus, I thought he says illegal was a sick word. Lynn was not amused. What's he saying now, Jack? He's fining you £500, Mick. Don't give a damn, it's in my hip pocket. I have it here in my hip pocket. What's he saying now, Jack? And 3 months in criminal and road jail, have you got that in your hip pocket? So 1968, Mick did 3 months in criminal road jail. He got out just prior to the All-Ireland Fla in Clones that year, and we landed down in the Diamond, and we saw that time the Flas I was a Drogheda this year, and they got very big, but But that time, way back 50 years ago, they were a much smaller affair in a town like Clones. They could cater for an All-Ireland fly. The wee green Morris Minor pulls into the diamond, Mickey McElhatton. And he got out, and of course, a big welcome for him. You see, he always wore these knee breeches and the paddy hat and a great tweed jacket. Steps out of the car and we all welcomed him, you know. I looked into the back of the Morris Minor and there was a black-faced ram in the back seat of the Morris Minor. I said, what the name of God are you doing with that in the back seat? Oh, I have a customer for that, he said, out the road. He went out and he opened the boot of the car and there was 2 crates of potching in the back. He said, I've a few customers for this as well, he says. And he says, if those boys, he says that the governor was very good to me, he says, in the prison. He let me work in the kitchen. And if those boys was working along with me in the kitchen were taking heed, you should have a nice wee drop for Christmas. He was a real character. That, just before Christmas, there was a very popular programme on, I don't know if you got it down here, but it was very popular up north. Dave Allen, great comedian, and he used to have his own show way back, 1968, I'm talking about 50 years ago. There's nobody old enough maybe to remember it. Anyway, Dave does his usual stories, one thing and another. He said, I have a special guest tonight, and who walks onto the studio? Mickey McElhatton, complete, and they'd set up a still in the studio, and he demonstrated how to make potching in the studio. He says, of course I'm retired now. You know? Damn the fear, was he retired? This was his favourite song. Oh, I am a rambling Irishman, from town to town I steer, and like many other young man I like me pint of beer, and like many other young man I like me whiskey clear. Ah, you think I was some lord or duke, the son of a gambolier. Now this old hat that I wear, I paid 2 pence I swear, on a Sunday when I put it on, all the people at me stare. On a Sunday when I put it on, I cut it rather grand. You think I was some lord or duke, the son of an honest man. Now this old coat that I wear, I got in the pawn store, aye, and when that it does got wet, I hang it on the floor. And when that it dries again, likewise I put it on. You think I was some lord or duke, the son of an honest man. Now take a glance at these old pants, they're baggy at the knees. They're worn so thin I feel the wind blow through me extremities. When I was young and handsome, all the people did agree. But now the girls look down their nose, I'm a relic of poverty. Yes, I am a rambling Irishman, from town to town I steer. And like any other younger man, I like me pint of beer. And like any other young man, I like me whiskey clear. You think I was some lord or duke, the son of a gambolier. Now these old shoes that I wear, they came from the Crimea War. I got them off an old soldier who died of wounds and scars. The sole from the uppers parted and me heels look back to sea. And my big toes stare me in the face, a relic of poverty. Yes, I am a rambling Irishman, from town to town I steer. And like any other younger man, I like me pint of beer. And like any other younger man, I like me whiskey clear. You think I was some lord or duke, the son of a gambolier. Now, well, the pursuit of songs wasn't as easy back when I was a young lad. It's an awful lot easier now. We have all sorts of archives up online. You can look up all sorts of things. But I had to go up guttery gaps, and sometimes I would only get a verse or maybe 2 verses of a song, and I couldn't remember the rest of it. And lucky enough, my uncle, my mother's brother, very kindly cut out many newspaper cuttings for me. And way back in 1923 to 1939, there was a weekly column in the local newspaper, the Northern Constitution, and it was called Songs of the People. And it was a man called Sam Henry. Sam was born in 1879 and died in 1952. I never met Sam, but he was a bit of a personality back at that time. And these newspaper cuttings were in a shoebox, along with handwritten songs that my uncle had collected from family and neighbours. And he gave them to me, but there were gaps in them. They were numbered, and I could see there was a lot of gaps. He only cut out the ones he was interested in, and they weren't all there. But then I found out that Sam Henry very kindly deposited 2 big scrapbooks up in the Central Library in Belfast. So I started filling in the gaps, because it was a sort of a Bible, for filling in. Because, as I say, a lot of the older singers, I was meeting people that had been born in the latter end of the 19th century or early part of the 20th century. So by the time I was going after their songs in the early 60s and through the 60s and 70s, a lot of them were bringing these songs, hadn't sung them for years, so they maybe could only remember bits and pieces, maybe a verse or two. So more often, or not every time, but sometimes these songs would appear in Sam Henry's collection. Now, I was going through the Central Library copies, and there was a few requests. It was a very unique way of collecting songs. He would print a song every week, but then he'd have a footnote to say if any of the readers would have such and such a song, would they please write into the paper. And he would either go and see them, or he would get the words from them, and the next thing it would appear in the column. But it came to 1939. Believe it or not, it was due to paper shortage that the column was stopped. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. So this was one of the casualties. So I went right through to 1939, and there was a request for a song called The Lochdu Poachers, which never appeared, but I had got the song from my uncle. So I said to my uncle, you didn't send that song into Sam Henry. He was looking for it there, and whatever the date was in the 30s. And he looked at me aghast. I should have known better, because my uncle was a well-known poacher. And it was a song about poaching, and he didn't want to draw attention to himself. My mother told me that when she was a lump of a girl, Willie, her brother, he was a tall man, he was over 6 foot, big gabardine coat he wanted 2 pockets, so she had to sew in 2 pockets, and he could have a salmon in each of them and walk up the street and nobody would know anything about it. So I was delighted to see that the Heather Dew pub, I was up putting flowers on my parents' grave, and the Heather Dew pub is now called the Poacher's Pocket. That'll be after my uncle. Now, the collection did finally get published, a big book, over 800 songs, and 1990, University of Georgia Press brought it out, and it's very well researched and so forth, giving you all the versions that are found in America and all sorts of information. So it's Lanny Herman was responsible for that in 1990, but had an American. The reason why it was published in America was that Sam also sent 2 scrapbooks over to the Library of Congress, and that was how it became to their attention, and it finally got published. Now, there's a collage here of singers. I know a few of them. I knew this man particularly here because he's a neighbour, a man called John McGrath, and he gave one song to Sam called the Money Grand Pig Hunt. It's a song of the Land League from the 19th century, and that photograph was taken in the 30s. I met him, must have been 25 or 30 years after that there, and he gave me a whole clatter of songs that he didn't give to Sam. And I said to him, John, why'd you not give more songs to Sam Henry? Well, he says, I found out what his real job was. That wasn't his real job. Well, what do you mean? He was an excise man. He worked for the government. My dad was making potching out in the barn. He says, damn sure I didn't want him coming about the place. So I'll sing a few verses of one, maybe a couple of his songs, but he was a very musical man. And as I say, they're a musical family. One morning in May, as I carelessly did stray, for the view yon gay meadows and the lambs sport and play, in the clear morning dew, as I lay down to muse, a fair maiden of honour appeared in my view. Says I, pretty maid, how happy we could be, for it is so decreed, love, that married we should be. Let me none see a frown, for this heart is your own. When these words they were spoken, sure the tears trickled down. Come, dry up your tears, there is nothing to fear. I will roam through the green fields for many's a long year. When the birds sang so sweet, this young man proved his deceit, saying, adieu, pretty fair maid, we will never more meet. Another song that he sang was The Rights of Man. And The Rights of Man was a very important document. It was a book that came out in 1792 in London by a man called Thomas Paine, very influential political philosopher of the latter end of the 18th century. So important was he that it influenced people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Napoleon Bonaparte, Wolfe Tone, Henry Joy McCracken, and numerous others. Napoleon said that he kept a copy of The Rights of Man under his pillow, and that there should be a statue of gold in every city in Europe to honor Thomas Paine. Whenever Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself in Notre Dame Cathedral, Thomas Paine said he was the biggest blackguard that ever was born, and that he had become a bigger tyrant than the ones that went before him. So he wasn't impressed when he crowned himself emperor. Anyway, that's another story. The Rights of Man. I'll do a couple of verses of this. Now, John McGrath told me that he got it from his father. His father had been born about the 1870s, and that the author was a man called John Shields, and that he was from Portadown, County Armagh, and he was on the run and ended up in Drogheda, and he's actually buried in Drogheda. Rights of Man. I'll do a couple of verses of it. I'll speak in candour of a night in slumber. My mind did wander near to Athlone, to the centre station of our Irish nation, where a congregation unto me was shown. Beyond my counting, upon a mountain, close to a fountain that clearly ran. The earth did tremble, I'll not dissemble, as they assembled for the rights of man. Now the congregation or population in elevation agreed to part, shook hands like brothers and embraced each other, whilst friendship smothered in each man's heart. We separated, all animated, aye, and elevated at what went on. As dawn was breaking, poor Shields awaking, crying, still be true to the rights of man. You never know who's in an audience. I was in Boston College a couple of years ago, and this lady came up to me, and she said, Mr. Graham, did you ever hear tell of a man called Samuel Neilson? I said, yeah. I said, he's a hero of mine. And her face lit up. You're the first person that ever heard tell of him, that I've asked so many people, and you're the first person, particularly from Ireland. I said, he's a hero of mine. Samuel Neilson was the editor of the Northern Star, the newspaper of the Society of United Irishmen. And he published this newspaper, which didn't cost him his life, but it cost him being imprisoned in Kilmainham, and then he was sent over to Inverness-shire to Fort George, and he was kept there for 5 years, and he finally emigrated to America. So this lady was 6 times great granddaughter of Samuel Neilson, which is an American that I met over in Massachusetts, Boston. The Northern Star, of course, published songs and poetry and all sorts of things, including poems of Robert Burns. The first time A Man's a Man for All That appeared in print was in Belfast. You mightn't think A Man's a Man for All That was very seditious, but I suppose when you think about it at that time, the 18th century, the latter end of the 18th century, and the aristocracy were getting very nervous with what was going on in France. If you think about it, like a prince may make a belted knight, a marquis, a duke, and all that, but an honest man's above his might. Good Lord, he mustn't have that. For all that and all that, his ribboned stars and all that, the man of independent mind, he looks and he laughs at all that. So let us pray that come what may, as come it will, for all that sense and worth of all the earth shall be the goal for all that and all that is coming yet, for all that man to man the world all o'er shall brothers be, for all that. So that appeared in Belfast before it actually appeared in print anywhere else. And Robert Burns got a copy of The Rights of Man, and it made an impression on him, of course. He was a bit of a rebel himself, although he had to be careful, because he also was an excise man. But his wife was expecting another pair of twins, Jean Armour, and he had to be very careful. He didn't want to lose his job because he had to feed a lot of little mouths. When Europe's eyes are fixed on mighty things, the fate of empires and the fall of kings, while quacks of state must each produce a plan, even children are lisping the rights of man. Mid all this mighty fuss, just let me mention the rights of women merit some attention. Mr. Robert Burns. Now, I would need a week here to go through an awful lot of people and places and songs, but I want to mention another great old character, a traveller that I had the good fortune to tour with. In 1968, the Arts Council in the North organised a tour called Room to Rhyme. It was Séamus Ennis, Michael Longley, and Davy Hammond. I met them in Ballymoney at that time. And shortly after that there, Sean O'Boyle and Jerry Hicks and Maggie Barry and Joe Burke were asked to do a tour. I think it was either 69 or 70. Shortly after that 68 tour anyway, the Room to Rhyme tour, a tour was organised. Sean O'Boyle and Jerry were teachers in St. Patrick's College in Armagh City, and they couldn't do the whole tour, so I was given half of it. So that was my first encounter with Maggie Barry at close quarters. And we went around various places in the north, and she told me a wonderful story. You know, I've been on the road all my life, she said, and we had the old barrel-top caravan parked up near Crossmaglen, she says, in the early 50s. And I used to go in, get the bus in from Crossmaglen into Newry on a Thursday, and I'd busk, she says. She had a big long-necked banjo, and she had a stocking up in the machine heads hanging down with a bit of wire, you see, and it hanging down, and she would busk away in the street. She'd pop that long neck onto your nose, and you'd throw money into the sock, you see, and that's how she did. She called that bottling. I used to bottle the people with the stocking. You'd stick that under your nose. And she says, I would do that on a Thursday, she says, and then I'd come back to the caravan in Crossmaglen, she says, and then on a Friday I would get the bus the other direction, to Castleblaney. I landed in the Castleblaney, she says, got in to do my busking, she says, in Castleblaney. That was the market day in Blaney, she says. Market day in Uri was Thursdays, and busking away. And I knew, she says, at lunchtime, a lot of the old farmers that sold their cattle and sold their sheep and whatever, their pigs, whatever, they had a heap of money, she says, and usually be looking for somewhere for a feed. And I was passing the fish and chip shop, and I knew there'd be a lot of the old farmers in there, and I go to the fish and chip shop, he said, busking away and doing well because of their heaps of money after selling their animals, she says. And the proprietor, get out now, Maggie, you're redundant. I looked over, and over on the wall was a jukebox. He was after getting a jukebox and installing it. This is the early 50s. And somebody put a threepenny bit in, she says, and stuck their finger and played the old Homan Waltz, it was called. And it really was reminiscent, she says, of a song that I knew called The Bard of Armagh. When I got out onto the street, I give them The Bard of Armagh, full throttle. And she could sing, she didn't need a microphone, I can tell you. After singing all her life out the street, she had a good pair of lungs. Anyway, she gave it the full throttle. Upstairs, above the fish and chip shop, was the Monaghan Argus newspaper. The editor's typing away, getting his newspaper ready, and he heard this commotion out in the street. You see, he went over, lifted the sash window and stuck his head out, and here's Maggie striking away at the Bard of Armagh, and he reached over and he grabbed a hold of a camera, took a photograph of it, and apparently it was such a good photograph, he sold it to the Irish press. Following Sunday, half page, Maggie Barry. Caption, ballad singer versus jukebox. Alan Lomax had come over in 1951. He'd been working, still was working for the Library of Congress, his father before him, and he went to the BBC and convinced the BBC that they should do a musical survey. More or less what I said earlier, things were changing rapidly in America and changing rapidly here. All these inventions were coming in cinema, radio, everything was changing. The old traditions was under threat. So he convinced the BBC to do a musical survey. He came over to Dublin to meet Séamus Ennis, and Seamus was employed by the BBC for a few years, and they did a massive survey of the musical traditions of these islands. Sean O'Boyle had the 9 counties of Ulster, including the Donegal Gaeltacht. He died in 1979. Sean was a wonderful mentor and help to me as a young person. Seamus covered the other 23 counties, including the Gaelic-speaking areas of Connemara and Munster. That wonderful collection was made at that time due to Alan Lomax. Anyway, after me encountering the pipes for the first time back in the early 50s, mid-50s probably, Willie Hope, I was up rummaging around some old 78s because they were going out of vogue. Vinyl was coming in, this would be early 60s, and I picked up a wonderful little 45 RPM. I was looking for it. I have it somewhere safe at home, and I value it very much. It cost me 10 shillings and sixpence, half a guinea. Back then it was called the Ace and Juice of Piping, and it was made by Séamus Ennis. Wonderful, wonderful. He was really at himself back at that time. And he plays 2 wonderful double jigs, Podging O'Rafferty. I think Sixpenny Money was the other one. But the slow air that really took my fancy, and I think it's one of his finest renditions of a slow air, is a South Armagh tune called Ur Killicragan. His very first job was working for Three Candles, McCollum O'Loughlin, who brought this book out in 1939. I have the other one that came out in 65 as well. But the Three Candles Press, and Colum employed a very young Séamus Ennis in his Fleet Street. It was just off Fleet Street, the press, and that was where he got his first employment. And he was recommended to Séamus de Largy of the Folklore Commission, as it was called then, for a job in the Folklore Commission, and he went to work there next. And the very first job he got was working on wax cylinders that had been made in the early part of the 20th century by Father Luke Donlan. And Luke Donlan was a very fine concert pianist who had a bad accident doing a bit of archaeology with dynamite. I don't think they do archaeology now with dynamite, but that's how he blew a few fingers off, apparently. So he imported an early version of the Edison phonograph and started recording some of the native speakers of South Armagh and the Cooley Peninsula. That area was a Gaeltacht the day before yesterday, so he was one of the people that managed to get these wax cylinders. So one of Séamus's early jobs was to transcribe these tunes down for the Folklore Commission, and they are there. And one of the ones that he worked on was the Ur Killicregan. But I'll try another one that he transcribed, and the singer in this instance was a man called James McKeown from Loch Ross, near not too far from Crossmaglen. I think it was very early on in the early part, 1909, I think it was, that he recorded him singing his version of, well, it is an Ulster song, although Connemara, Joe Heaney claimed it was a Munster, a Connacht song, but it's not, it's an Ulster song. Cathal McGill was, well, they reckon he's from near Blackland in County Cavan, but he's buried in Donamoyne in County Monaghan. And he was born back in the latter end of the 17th century and lived through to 1756. He's buried in St. Patrick's Old Graveyard in Donamoyne, County Monaghan. I'm going to sing it in English. Unfortunately, I don't have the Irish. But like Willie Clancy, he said that when he came back, he would want to be a native speaker. He would even forego his ability to play the pipes if he could speak the Irish language. And I would also endorse that as well. So the yellow bittern has been extinct in Ireland for 150 years until recently. It has turned up again after 150 years in Wexford, a secret location. I don't think the ornithologists are too keen to give away where it is. It's breeding again for the first time. But we can actually date this to the Little Ice Age of 1709, I think it was. In folklore, it's known as the Year of the Iron Frost. So this translation has been translated by Thomas MacDonagh, 1916 fame, wrote a translation of it, I should say, and that's the one that most people sing. Seamus Heaney also translated it, but this particular translation is by Padraigin the Uluhan. And Padraigin, being a singer, made it a song which it was intended to be. It's got all the internal rhyming which the original song in Irish has. And whilst there's some great poems from the translations, they're not necessarily singable. So this is Padraigin's translation of the Yellow Bittern. I'll finish off with this. Oh, yellow bittern, for you I mourn, stretched out alone after all the fun. Not food, I think, but the want of drink, left you lying here with your face upturned. Much worse than Troy, long since destroyed, your body cold on naked stone, For hurt or harm you brought to none, not wine for you, just a water hole. Oh, my lovely Bittern caused countless pain, left lying here at your journey's end. And many the dawn I hear your call, but now you lie in a mucky ben. My heart it breaks with 1,000 aches, you in the ditch my soul lament. The rats so great gone to your wing, in jollification I and merriment. I went to the wake, though sad and frail, with a bottle of ale inside my coat, that he might swill a drop or two to went his bill and inside his throat. But oh dear, oh my sorrowful woe, not a drop will went his beak again. The drink is done, I am gone alone, going home from the wake of my Bittern friend. My love, she urged me to give it up, or my life would be short, aye, and end in tears. I said myself that her words were false, that a drop of drink brought me extra years. See now the full-throated singing burned, a mighty thirst brought a silent end. My comrade dear, wet your lips here, for you'll not get any when you're lying dead. And Bonham go ye. Thank you very much.